What's up, everybody? Today I'm here to do my April reading wrap up, and I don't have many books to talk about today. This was also kind of a slow reading month for me, like last month. I've been in a still kind of a mild reading slouch or burnout or whatever you want to call it, and it's slightly annoying because I want to read. I have tons of books I want to get to. I just haven't really been in the mood lately to read as much. I've still been reading, just not reading quite as much as I normally do. And then I have also been watching a lot of shows and movies lately, which isn't something I typically do as much, but I guess just to switch things up and to take a break from reading. So I've currently been like rewatching through the Harry Potter films since I've finished the books recently, and I'll possibly do like a Harry Potter movie ranking video or something when I'm finished rewatching through those. And I've also been watching through some anthology shows like The Twilight Zone and Tales from the Dark Side. So yeah, I've been just doing some other things and watching some shows and spending more time doing that instead of reading as of lately. Hopefully, I'll get back into reading more because I don't know if you can see on the video or not, but I actually just got another new bookshelf that I set up recently. And I'm very excited to have like 90% of my books on display. I don't have quite enough room for every book in my collection. I have a few stacked up on the floor here and then a few like boxes that have some books in them. But like 90% of my library is on display, which is really cool, and I'm excited about that. Yeah, I've only got, let's see, 5 books here that I read in this month of April, which is way below my average, but that's okay. And some of these I've already covered in other videos and reviews, so I won't be going into a lot of detail about these. But the first book that I read this month in April is Haunted Houses by Robert Sansucci. And this is a book that, again, I did an individual review of this one. If you want to hear my more in-depth thoughts on this, and in that review I go into a little bit more detail about like all the individual stories in here. But in short, I really enjoyed this book. This one really surprised me. I didn't really expect a lot going into this, but I enjoyed most of the stories in here, with a couple of them really surprising me. One story in here, I forget the name of it. Let me see real quick. Many. It has to do with the haunted house and a Ouija board, and that story was very dark and twisted. One of the scariest kids' short horror stories I've ever read in my life. So yeah, this was a really fun book. I highly recommend this if you're into reading kids' horror. That was the first book I read this month, and I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars overall. The second book that I read this month was Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. This is also a book that I have a video up talking more about this, along with all of the other Harry Potter books, and did like a ranking of them. And this was a very good book. I do have some issues with it. This one has some weird pacing issues. The first 500 pages of the book, the characters spend looking for like one Horcrux, and it's them just kind of trying to stay underground and hiding out from the Death Eaters and trying to stay low key, and them wandering in the wilderness looking for just this one Horcrux and then trying to figure out how to destroy it. It's kind of slow for like the first 2/3 of this book. But of course, the final battle and climax of this book and Voldemort versus Harry, that's all very cool to see. Wasn't quite as an epic and perfect conclusion to this series as I was hoping it to be, but it was still very, very good. I give it a high 4 out of 5 stars, kind of leaning more into like a 4.25 out of 5. And I'm actually on the Deathly Hallows movies as we speak. I just finished watching Half-Blood Prince, so now I need to watch Deathly Hallows Part 1 and 2, and I'm curious to see how they'll compare to the book upon rewatch. Yeah, this was very good, just not quite perfect. Okay, then the third book that I read this month, I do not have a physical copy of this book. I do not own it, unfortunately. But that is Why I Quit the Babysitter's Club, part of the Bone Chiller series by Betsy Haynes. And this one was ghostwritten. I believe the first 10 books in the Bone Chiller series were written by Betsy Haynes, and then the later books, 11 through 23, I think it goes up to, were all just ghostwritten by various authors. And a good friend of mine actually has a copy of this book and let me borrow it so I could read it. And it was okay. I gave it a low 3 out of 5, kind of like a 2.75 out of 5. I kind of liked some of the ideas this one had. It's basically about this young girl who goes to babysit for this elderly couple. And it turns out that this thing she is babysitting or supposed to be babysitting might not be human. And yeah, I don't really have a lot to say about this one. It was just okay. I liked some things about it, but the writing was just very bland. It just felt kind of vanilla. I don't know how else to put it. It just it was kind of a basic story. And the reveal of what this thing she was babysitting for actually was, I wasn't a big fan of. There was some kind of like dark backstory. She discovers some like journal entries or diary entries that belong to this elderly couple that she is babysitting for. And we learn some backstory about what exactly this thing, this creature is that she's babysitting for and how it came to be. And there's some kind of interesting backstory to there that I actually like. This book definitely has some potential to be better than it was. But the final reveal, I wasn't really completely sold on it. But this book does get a little bit dark towards the end. There's actually some character deaths in here, believe it or not. They're not like really violent or anything. We don't really get a whole lot of detail on it. But there are some characters in this book that actually die, which is pretty crazy. That's not something you see super often in kids' horror books. So yeah, bonus points for that, I guess. So yeah, Why I Quit the Babysitter's Club. This was an alright, okay book. I would say one of the better Bone Chillers books that I've read so far, but not a big favorite. So yeah, like a low 3 out of 5 for that one. Okay, and then the last book that I read this month, or second to the last, is Blue World by Robert McCammon. So, if you guys saw my video where I showed off my entire adult horror collection, you know that I have like almost every book this guy wrote in my collection. Maybe not like almost every, but I have a lot of them. And I've continued collecting his horror paperbacks as I've found them out at used bookstores. And I've finally just gotten around to reading my very first one. This is a short story collection. I figured that would be a good place to start. Read some of his short stories, see what this author is about, his writing style, what kind of stories he writes, that kind of thing. And I have to say, for as much hype as I've heard around this author and seeing all the positive reviews for this on Goodreads, I looked this book up on Goodreads, and like 95% of the reviews for this book are either 4 or 5 stars, talking about how just ingenious this book is, how every story in here is a banger, how this book is just incredible, and this author in general. And in my opinion, my personal opinion, of course, this is not me just trying to be objective, and I'm not trying to like crap on this author or his work. Again, this is just the first book I've read by him. I might change my mind down the road after I read some of his novels, but I was very disappointed with this. I fail to see what makes this book so incredible. This is a collection of 10 short stories, I believe. Let me double check. A little over 10. I think 12 or maybe 13 short stories in here. And out of all of the stories in this book, I think I enjoyed 3 of them, and then a couple were okay, and then the rest, to me, were just very meh, forgettable, with a couple of them being like outright bad. So yes, this is a very varied book. The stories in here are very mixed in quality. There were a few I greatly enjoyed. I'll kind of, I guess, run through the list of stories real quick. I won't go into a lot of detail about each one, but I'll just kind of briefly run through the contents and share my thoughts for each story. So Yellow Jacket Summer is the first story. It's basically about this family going on a road trip. They kind of take a detour and get lost out in the middle of nowhere. They stop at this gas station where you have these stereotypical kind of redneck characters who seem a bit suspicious and are possibly ill-intentioned, have ill intentions for the family. And it turns out that one of these redneck characters has this kind of mind power, psychic ability, I'm not sure how to describe it, to where he can command these Yellow Jackets to do his bidding, essentially. He basically commands these Yellow Jackets to go around and attack people. And that's basically what happens to this family who wind up in this small town in the middle of nowhere. And this story was okay. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. It was fine. It was kind of a cool idea, I guess. And I somewhat enjoyed it, but it wasn't anything that I thought was fantastic. So yeah, that was the first story. The second story in here was called Makeup, and it involves a sort of magical makeup kit where the wearer of these different makeups, this makeup kit belonged to like some old horror movie actor a long time ago, and it's like cursed. And depending which makeup application he puts on the person that is now in possession of this kit, he will turn into some kind of monster, some kind of like universal monster, werewolf, vampire, whatever the case may be. And yeah, this story was also just like a light good for me. I also gave this one a 3 out of 5 stars. I don't really have much to say about it. It's just, yeah, it's there. The next story in here is called Doom City, which is like a post-apocalyptic type story. This one was also kind of okay. I gave it a 2.5 out of 5 stars. I kind of liked it starting out. It had some eerie imagery and was a little bit atmospheric. But it ended on sort of a dream sequence nightmare type trope twist ending thing. We've seen this before where it's kind of makes the story all for nothing, but not really. There's like some implications there that these dreams this character might be having could possibly come true. Yeah, I don't know. This one was kind of okay. 2.5 out of 5 stars for Doom City. Nightcrawlers, the 4th story in this collection. This was one of the few that I actually quite enjoyed, and I gave this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Nightcrawlers is about this old Vietnam War veteran who wanders into this diner one day. And this story is kind of difficult to discuss without giving anything away, giving any spoilers. And I don't really want to because this was a pretty good one. This one is one of the like 3 stories in here that I enjoyed quite a bit. And I'll just say basically when this Vietnam War vet enters this diner, there's some trouble and conflict that happens, not involving him directly, I guess. There's some, let's say, ghosts haunting this war vet and some things that happened to him in the war that have kind of followed him back to his own turf, I guess. If that makes sense, you'll just have to read the story to see exactly what I'm talking about. Nightcrawlers was a pretty good one, and it also ended on a very ambiguous, kind of dark ending, which I really liked. It was very fitting for this story. So yeah, I really liked the way Nightcrawlers ended. Thought it was pretty cool. So yeah, 3.5 stars for that one. The next story in here is called Pin. Now, Pin is a story that is like 5 pages long, and I honestly can't even tell you what the story is about because I have no idea. This is just kind of like a WTF type of story. I think it's about some guy that's, I don't know if he's like drugged up or trying to do drugs, or if this story is like a metaphor about him being addicted to drugs. I don't know what was going on with this. He's like slowly contemplating sticking this pin inside of him and in his eye or something, or I have no idea. I gave it a 1.5 out of 5 stars. I didn't understand it. I didn't care for it. Yeah. The next story in here is called Yellow Child's Cage. And this one is about some prisoners in this prison, and one of these prisoners knows voodoo, and he has this bird that he can talk to, and he sends this bird away from the prison, flying and visiting different parts of the country, and he talks to it. And there's this other guy, prisoner, that he teaches his voodoo ways, and yeah. In case you guys can't really tell, I wasn't too exactly excited or passionate about this story either. It's just kind of whatever to me. You know, it wasn't bad, but it didn't really do anything for me. The concept is just kind of weird, and I also gave this one like a 2.5 out of 5 stars. Yeah, that one was Yellow Child's Cage. Okay. The next story in here is called Ice Cream Man. This story is along the same lines as Pin. This is a very, very brief story. Again, like 5 pages long. And it also kind of fits into that category for me of being like, WTF did I just read? Like, what is going on with this story? I did not understand this one. I can't even tell you what it's about. I don't know. Moving on. I also gave that one a 1.5 out of 5 stars. All right, the next story in here is called He'll Come Knocking at Your Door. This was probably my favorite story in this collection. I gave this one a solid 4 out of 5 stars. And this one has a really cool premise. But it wasn't perfect, which is why I only gave it a 4. But I love the concept of the story where you have this young couple who have a couple of young children. They move to this new town, and everything in life seems to go their way. Prior to this, they were having some trouble, like financially, and just some life troubles. I think the dad and the husband of this family was like having trouble finding a job and just some different things like that. And they move to this new town. He gets this new job. He's making a good amount of money. Everything in life seems to be going almost too well in this new town. Everyone is very friendly, they're neighbors. And then one day, a community of people, some of his neighbors and friends that he's made in this new town, invite him to this little group, this little get together that they are having at like one of this guy's house. And when he goes there, these guys tell him that on Halloween night, which at this point in the story, Halloween is soon approaching. I believe maybe it's that night that they have that meeting. I can't remember, the following night. They tell him on Halloween night that he has a list of things he needs to leave out on the porch step for a certain someone, certain character. They don't reveal exactly what. And if they don't leave, or if that character doesn't leave the list of items on the porch, on the doorstep, then he'll come knocking at your door. They don't say exactly who it is, but someone will come knocking at his door, and they will take more than just what is on the list. And the list of items that our main character gets, the dad and father of this family, or dad and husband of this family, I mean, it's a very bizarre list. I think one of the items on there is like fingernail clippings or something like that. There's one item on the list that he makes him not willing to go through with this plan and makes him think that this is some kind of practical joke. And the item in question is, I believe, his son's finger, or one of his son's fingers. Yes, he has to chop off one of his kid's fingers and leave it on the doorstep. And according to this group of gentlemen that he's having like this get together with, and that are telling him that he needs to do this and follow this list, otherwise bad things will happen, essentially. They tell him that this is the price. This is sort of the payment in return for all of the good luck and fortune and blessings that are heaped upon this character, along with all of the other residents of this town, and that every year they have to adhere to this list, and they have to make small sacrifices in order to receive all of this good luck that they're getting. And of course, the husband, he thinks that this is some kind of practical joke at first, and he decides not to go through with this. I mean, of course, how can he chop off his own kid's finger? I mean, that's pretty messed up. However, he discovers that there may be some truth to what these guys are telling him. And then from there, things get pretty crazy when he decides not to go through with this. And I won't spoil anything further, but I absolutely love this story. Very creepy, very cool concept. It wasn't quite perfect. That's why I only gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, because I feel like this idea could have been fleshed out a little bit more. This story felt just a little bit too short. I would have liked to see a little bit more of this idea. I think it could have been a little bit better executed. I think this book should have cut out the length of some of these other stories in here, or cut out a couple of stories completely, like Pin and Ice Cream Man, and made this one, He'll Come Knocking at Your Door, a little bit longer. This could have even been like a novella type story and have some other characters involved, other characters experience this for the first time as like this group of people moves into this town. But yeah, I love the idea to this one. So He'll Come Knocking at Your Door, 4 out of 5 stars. Favorite story in this book. Okay. The next story in here is called Chico. And Chico is kind of like a slice of life type story. It's sort of a drama, I guess you could say. I'm not really sure how else to categorize it. It's basically about this family living in poverty. You have the husband and father figure who is kind of abusive and alcoholic, and basically lays around and bosses his girlfriend around, and then his girlfriend's kid, and then his girlfriend is too timid to do anything about it, and her son is not all there. He's afflicted with some mental and physical diseases, and he's just, I don't know. This story was just another okay one, I guess. It's just, I don't know. Like a 2.5 out of 5 stars for this one. I don't have much to say about it. This was also a very short story. I'm pretty sure it was only like 10 pages long. And really not much happens in it. It's pretty much just this guy being kind of abusive to his girlfriend, who was previously, I think, like a hooker or a drug addict or something. I don't remember. And then her son, who is like kind of disabled. And it's basically them just in the apartment, just showing their terrible life. And that's pretty much all that happens. I don't really know the point to this story. It was well written. That's one thing that I actually haven't mentioned yet. Is Robert McCammon seems to be a pretty capable author. I think he has pretty good writing style. And that goes for most of the stories in here, not just this one. So it was well written, but the story itself just didn't really go anywhere. It didn't really do much for me. It was just kind of whatever. So yeah, 2.5 out of 5 stars for Chico. Okay. Let me see here. The next story is Night Calls the Green Falcon. And this is the third story in here that I enjoyed quite a bit. I also gave this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. And this one is about an old washed up movie actor slash stuntman guy who used to play this character way back in the day known as the Green Falcon. He was basically like this superhero type character. And this guy is now like very old. I don't know. I don't think it says his age exactly in the story, but I think we're led to believe he is somewhere in his 60s at least, possibly even 70s. He doesn't get around real well. He has a hard time breathing. He's not in the best shape. However, one day in this apartment that he lives in, he witnesses a very brutal murder by a well-known serial killer, literally like right next to his apartment. I believe it's in like the apartment just across from his. And for some reason, after witnessing this, he decides to play vigilante. He goes into his closet and puts on his old Green Falcon costume, which is like a green jumpsuit with like a mask, and I don't know if it has I think it has like a cloak to it as well. It's a costume he used to wear when he played this movie character many, many years ago. And he decides to go track down this serial killer and bring justice to him. And yeah, this one might sound a bit bizarre, but I quite enjoyed the story. This one surprised me, especially for being like kind of a superhero type story, which usually isn't my thing. But I really enjoyed this one. This one has a lot of humor to it. The story is quite funny. I like some of the comedy in here, but it was also very suspenseful too, because this elderly gentleman that used to play the Green Falcon, he is in not very good physical shape at all, and it's not like he goes around beating bad guys up or anything like that. He gets into a lot of kind of shady situations and dangerous scenarios, and has like a couple of close calls, but through like some smart decisions that he makes using his wits rather than his physique, I guess. He's an old man, can't really do much to fight back. But making some smart decisions along with a couple of other characters he encounters that sort of help him along the way, that kind of provide him as like sidekicks, I guess. He ends up apprehending the villain, and yeah, this was a pretty enjoyable story. I like this one. It feels kind of out of place in this book. Feels more like an action comedy type story than anything, or crime comedy, I guess you might be able to call it. But yeah, I really enjoyed that one. 3.5 out of 5 stars. That was a pretty good story. The next story in here is called The Red House, and this one was light good, decent, kind of like Yellow Jacket Summer and Makeup. I also gave this one a flat 3 out of 5 stars. Actually, maybe a 3.25 out of 5 for this one. I think I enjoyed this one slightly more than those first couple of stories. And this one is basically about a family that moves in next door to this other family that has this gray house, and this new family has their house painted like really bright red. And in this neighborhood they're in, it's a very like depressing and kind of gray neighborhood. All the houses are painted like gray, and it's kind of a poor area. And for some reason, the father of our main character I think is like a 12-year-old kid in the story, and his father does not like their new neighbors and is very bothered by the fact that they painted their house red. He thinks it's like a communist color, and that this new family that moved in are communists or something along those lines. And this story is also kind of a strange one that feels more of like a slice of life drama type story, similar to like Chico or something. There's just a lot of family conflict and drama that goes on in here, and it talks a little bit about poverty and things like that. However, there is sort of a supernatural twist to this story that kind of takes place towards the climax and the end of the story, which was kind of cool, but also felt just a little bit out of left field. I wasn't really sure what the author was trying to go for with this one. It felt just a little bit random at the end, even though it was kind of cool that it had that supernatural flair to it, because at first, this story just didn't really feel like it was going anywhere. But again, I did enjoy how well written it was. Again, Robert McCammon, I do kind of like his writing style, and I am curious to check out his novels at some point in the future, even though I wasn't a big fan of this book as a whole. So yeah, The Red House, it was a light good, a 3.25 out of 5. And then let's see, the next story in here is called Something Passed By. And this one, I'm already forgetting the details of. This one was just kind of whatever to me. 2 out of 5 stars. So yeah. Then the very last story in here is called Blue World, which is of course the title of the book as well. And Blue World is actually a novella. It's like a 200-page novella. And this is the most mind-boggling story in this collection to me. I'm at a loss for words for this one. So I'm not gonna really go into a lot of detail about this one. I'll just tell you the basic premise. It even kind of gives you a brief description of Blue World on the back here. It's basically about this priest. There's main character of the story is like a Catholic priest. And he encounters a woman one day who happens to be in the adult film industry. And he becomes obsessed with her and thinks he's falling in love with her. Of course, he's really just lusting after her. And he's basically trying to fight this temptation at first. And he sort of gives into this temptation and kind of descends into perversity and begins stalking this woman in the adult film industry. And much of the story is just him tracking her down and pursuing her. And when he does encounter her, he kind of changes his mind, I guess, about how he feels about her. He thinks he's actually in love with her instead of just like wanting her. And then she kind of falls in love with him. And it turns into a really bizarre romance / erotica. Yeah. I'm at a loss for words for this story. I don't even know what to say. So there is another plot line with this story. That's not all there is to it. There is also this kind of subplot where there's this serial killer who is tracking down and stalking women who are in the adult film industry, strippers, things like that. And he basically does things to them and kills them. But we don't really get much detail with that plot line or much page space. I think there's literally 10 to 15 pages of the story that take up that plot line. And the rest is just this relationship that is forming between this Catholic priest and the stripper, essentially. Yeah. That's Blue World in a nutshell. I gave this story a 1.75 out of 5. I guess I enjoyed it just enough to be able to finish it. I'll admit there were some parts of the story that I skimmed through because I was struggling to get through it, and it was also very sleazy and explicit, and there's, a lot of adult not safe for work content in the story. I can't recommend this one. I don't know what the point of this story was, to be honest. I don't even know why it was in here. I don't know if there's some kind of hidden message or theme to the story that I'm not catching on to. I have no idea. I did not enjoy the novella. I gave it a 1.75 out of 5. Probably my least favorite story in here next to Pin and Ice Cream Man. So yeah. That is Blue World by Robert McCammon. Overall, I gave this book a 2.75 out of 5. There were 3 stories in here I really enjoyed. Night Calls the Green Falcon, He'll Come Knocking at Your Door, and what was the other one? I'm already forgetting. Nightcrawlers. The rest of the stories in here, I could really care less about, to be honest. So yeah, a little bit of a letdown. Was kind of disappointed with my very first Robert McCammon book. But as I mentioned already, I will be checking out some of his novels in the future and giving this author another shot because I kind of do like his writing style. And I'd like to check out, I have a bunch of his novels in my collection already, so I'll definitely be reading some of those at some point. But yeah, his short story collection, I don't understand why this is so popular. That's just my personal opinion. And then the very last book that I read this month is another Bone Chillers book. And this one is called A Terminal Case of the Uglies. This is also one of the ghostwritten ones. And this is also a book that was lent to me by my good friend. I do not have this in my collection, unfortunately. And I gave this pretty much the same rating as I did Why I Quit the Babysitter's Club. Like a low 3 out of 5 stars. It was okay, decent. I kind of like the concept to this one. But the first half of this book was not good at all. It is so meandering, and just the story just feels like it drags and doesn't really go anywhere. And we don't hit like the action and climax of this book until like the last 20 pages. And this book is only like 100 pages long. And when we do get to like the big reveal within those last 20 pages, it is so obvious and predictable what is going on. I feel like what should have been the case is we should have gotten that twist earlier in the story, like at the halfway point, or even like 30, 40 pages in, and then the story progressed from there. It feels so rushed at the end. But I do like the direction the story goes. I do kind of like the ending of this book and how everything wraps up. And this one has like some decent characters to it, which is kind of weird. I kind of like the characterization in this book and their relationships. And there's also some characters in here that are kind of bullies to the protagonist. And then they sort of team up together at the end, and the bullies kind of help him defeat the villain. And yeah, I kind of like some things about this book, but again, it just suffered a little bit in execution. Kind of some of the same issues that I had with Why I Quit the Babysitter's Club are the same issues that I have with this book. So yeah, like a low 3 out of 5 stars for this one. I would say on the better end of the Bone Chillers books that I've read, but still not quite into the territory which I really love, or a book that I could highly recommend, or anything like that. So yeah, that's A Terminal Case of the Uglies. So those are all 5 books that I read this month in April. April is not quite over yet at the time of filming this. There's a couple of days left, but I don't think I will be reading, or at least finishing, any books within these last couple of days. So I just figured I'd do my reading wrap up now. Yeah, that's all I have today, guys. If you have any thoughts on any of these books that I talked about, feel free to let me know what they are down in the comments below. And that's all I have. I'll see you guys next time.